No Safe Harbor, Alasdair MacIntire and a Society Unmoored. We live in a culture that speaks constantly about morality, yet increasingly struggles to explain what morality is or why it should command our allegiance. Public debates are saturated with moral language: justice, rights, harm, dignity. But these words often function less as shared principles and more as weapons in ideological conflict. We argue passionately, yet talk past one another. We condemn, yet rarely persuade. According to the philosopher Alasdair MacIntire, this condition is not accidental. It is the predictable result of a long intellectual journey that began with the Enlightenment and culminated in postmodern fragmentation. MacIntyre's central claim, most fully articulated in After Virtue, is that modern moral discourse is in a state of grave disorder. We continue to use the language of objective morality while having lost the philosophical framework that once gave it coherence. The result is what MacIntyre calls emotivism, the condition in which moral judgments are reduced to expressions of preference, feeling, or attitude, masquerading as rational argument. This disorder did not arise overnight. It is the product of a historical rupture. Pre-modern moral reasoning, especially in the Aristotelian and Thomistic traditions, understood ethics as teleological. Human beings were thought to have a nature, and that nature implied an end, or purpose. Moral reasoning consisted in asking what kinds of practices, virtues, and social structures enabled human beings to flourish according to that end. Virtue made sense because life itself was intelligible as a coherent story moving toward a goal. The Enlightenment attempted to preserve morality while severing it from this framework. Enlightenment thinkers rejected the metaphysical and theological assumptions of earlier traditions, but hoped to retain universally binding moral norms grounded in reason alone. Kant, Hume, and later utilitarians offered competing accounts of moral obligation, each attempting to supply a rational foundation without reference to shared ends or a thick account of human nature. MacIntyre argues that these projects failed not because the thinkers were careless, but because the task itself was impossible. Moral rules cannot survive the loss of the narrative context that gives them meaning. Detached from an account of what human beings are for, moral injunctions become arbitrary. They remain in our language, but not in our reasoning. In After Virtue, MacIntyre illustrates this with a vivid metaphor. He asks us to imagine a world in which the natural sciences have been destroyed and only fragments remain: terms, equations, and practices used by people who no longer understand the theories that once made sense of them. That, he says, is the condition of modern moral discourse. Postmodernism did not resolve this problem. It exposed it and then surrendered to it. Where the Enlightenment sought foundations and failed, postmodern thought concluded that no foundations exist at all. Moral claims were recast as expressions of power, identity, or social construction. What remained was not moral reasoning, but moral performance. In this environment, disagreement becomes endless. There is no shared standard by which arguments can be settled. Each side appeals to principles the other does not recognize. As MacIntyre observes, moral debate becomes interminable precisely because there is no longer any common measure of rational justification. Worse still, we are often unable to see the depth of this problem. We lack the intellectual tools to diagnose it. We no longer think as the classical thinkers did, nor even as the Enlightenment thinkers did. We inherit fragments of moral language and mistake them for a complete system. In After Virtue, MacIntyre says that what we possess are fragments of a conceptual scheme that have been torn from the contexts that once gave them meaning. This explains why modern moral discourse feels both urgent and hollow. We sense that something is deeply wrong, yet struggle to explain what has been lost. We argue over outcomes without agreement on purposes. We invoke rights without consensus on duties. We speak of justice without a shared understanding of the good. MacIntyre's answer is not to return to Enlightenment rationalism, nor to embrace postmodern skepticism. It is to recover virtue ethics grounded in tradition, practice, and narrative. Human beings, he argues, are storytelling animals. We understand our lives as parts of larger stories, embedded in communities that pass on standards of excellence over time. Virtues make sense only within such stories. Courage, honesty, and justice are not abstract rules. They are qualities cultivated within practices aimed at goods internal to those practices. When a society loses its shared narrative, it loses its ability to sustain virtue, even if it continues to praise virtue in words. This is why our society feels unmoored. We have cut ourselves loose from the harbor of a unifying moral story, yet we continue to navigate as though our compass still works. We drift between moral outrage and moral exhaustion, confident in our judgments but unsure of their foundations. At the end of After Virtue, MacIntyre famously suggests that what we need is not a new moral theory, but, quote, another, doubtless very different, Saint Benedict, end quote. He is not calling for retreat from the world, but for the slow rebuilding of moral communities capable of sustaining virtue through shared practices and shared ends. The lesson is sobering. The Enlightenment and its postmodern aftermath did not deliver moral clarity. They left us free-floating, rich in moral language, but poor in moral understanding. Until we recover a uniting narrative, one that can explain not only what we value but why, we will remain cut loose from the harbor, arguing fiercely while drifting aimlessly.